if Fred is delighted with the way things panned out, then Ferrari got a real problem because it was an absolute mess, total disaster. And the reality is, I was thinking this morning when I woke up, I thought, how did that happen? Can we blame Lewis? Can we blame Charles, the engineers? No, of course you can't. The guy you blame, sadly, is Fred Vasseur. Lando, stay in your lane, stop all the interviews and the social media. Focus exactly on your race, your car, your team, and do it your way. We can only daydream. But if Max was in that McLaren,
Oh
I'm
my
sorry,
gosh.
Lando. You wouldn't know how far he'd gone away from you. He'd be just gone.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the legend that is the goatiest to have ever goated in F1, the one that they call Peter Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
Well, I've got to confess, I'm quite hay fevery at the moment, so excuse the tone of my voice. I might have to blow my nose at some point. I'm taking a lot of stuff up my nose, in my eyes. Doesn't seem to be doing a lot of good. It'll go in a week or two here. It's just this right now we're in the middle of the hay fever season. But apart from that, great, thanks. Yeah, late nights, series of 3 late nights. I mean, I'm one of these guys that goes to bed normally at about 10:30, 11, I guess. But to go to bed at 3 for 2 o'clock in the morning,
Oof,
3 successive days. I'm pretty shattered actually, but not as shattered
oof.
as Dexter, who's down here lying asleep at my feet. So that's good.
Let's go.
All's well with the world.
Who would be an F1 fan? Peter, let's talk
He
about some
is.
F1 there, because there are a gazillion
Yeah.
stories and F1 centric threads at which we need to pull, as is compulsory, Mr. Windsor. Tell me the biggest story to come out of the Miami Grand Prix weekend this weekend just passed.
Well, I think for those that haven't been watching the arrival of Andrea Kimi Antonelli, that's how you have to remember Miami. This was the day when the 18-year-old landed on the planet Earth that everybody is inhabiting and made his presence felt. Of course, it's been evident before that. It was evident right back in Formula 4 and then in Formula 2, although Ollie Berman needs to still stand up and take a lot of credit because he was pretty near Kimi in Formula 2 and he's driven really well in Formula 1 this year, I think. But going back to Andrea Kimi, I think, yeah, it was like that sort of a lacy moment in Phoenix, admittedly on the Pirellis in the Tyrrell, but nonetheless, it was one of those big moments that you'll never forget. This guy just arriving at Miami and using his amazing talent on short corners, particularly on the slower corners, where for the first time in a while there are 3 or 4 or 5 of them around Miami compared with other circuits, and he just did incredibly well. I just can't wait to see this guy around Monaco now because he's going to be absolutely brilliant through Rascasse. Sander Vogt, he's going to be really good. Casino entry, maybe not as good as George going up, the top of the hill there, but down the hill all the way to the entry to the pool. I'm a little bit concerned about how he's going to go into the pool section because I still don't think he's as finessey on super quick corners as he is and everywhere else of his repertoire. And I think, but that will come. Yeah, as we see already, he's improving massively on medium speed corners. And into turn 7 in Miami, I'd put him right up there with Max. He was just superb. And what a first lap he drove as well. I mean, he was nearly in front, wasn't he? So I think, we can all have a laugh about Ferrari and what they were up to yesterday. And of course, it was a dominant McLaren 1-2, and they made the opposition look ridiculous. Even though both drivers were held up early on, they still won by over half a minute. That obviously has to be the historical stake in the ground from that race. But for me, it was Kimi Antonelli. I mean, this guy is really good.
Uh, I don't disagree with Kimi Antonelli. It's astounding that we're in the era proper now of the rookies, that they almost come because of all the sim work and all of the testing in prior year cars that he's done 10,000 kilometers or whatever. He almost is. It's almost disingenuous to call Kimi Antonelli a rookie. These guys are ready to go on, all apart from Jack Doohan. They seem like they've come out the box ready to go. No, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Jack Doohan's done very well too. I mean, he made Q2 in Miami, and he just a lot of things have been happening to Jack in the first 5, 6 races. So I think he's very good, Jack Doohan, much better than perhaps his results would suggest. And don't underestimate what he did in Miami in qualifying. That was really impressive. Um, But and I think it's also quite easy to generalize about how rookies just come in now and they can walk on water because of sims, because of this, because of that. If you're a great natural talent, you can do it. You can do it. Doesn't matter how many sim sessions you have, doesn't matter how much testing you do, even if you have very few of both, if you're a great natural talent, you'll be able to do it. I've always said that. And, look at the drivers before the age of sims and before the age of testing. If you were good, you jumped in a car and you were quick straight away. And I think that's what we're seeing with Antonelli. Yes, the sort of Bortoleto level drivers, it's definitely a huge help. And he looked pretty good as well, didn't he, in Miami? But in general, a great talent is a great talent. And I don't really like that whole bracketing thing of the rookies and what Formula Two is doing. I mean, the reality is they don't have enough testing and they should have more testing. And we should also remember that Antonelli is driving for a very, very good race team. So he's making his Formula One debut a little bit like Lewis Hamilton or Ayrton Senna, if you like. All the great drivers were rated highly long before they got into Formula One. And in most cases, they landed in a very good car straight away and were able to show their talent. I say that only because of the drivers that were not able to do that. I mean, Sterling Moss, relatively good example. I mean, Carl Kling was in the factory Mercedes in 1954. Why wasn't Sterling in the car? That sort of thing. And so his stats obviously are affected by that. And you had to look at drivers that don't have those opportunities. Chris Amon, a very, very good example of a great talent who never really had the right opportunity at the right time in the right team. But Antonelli's got that, so we should always remember that. But he's making good use of it. There's nothing wrong with that. Good luck to him, and he's making maximum use of it. And I think also he seems to have an immense amount of humility for his age as well, which I think is probably quite unusual for kids. Can I call them kids? 18 years old. And he seems to have been brought up very well, and to have got that sort of solid base to the way he thinks about life and how enthusiastic and how humble he is about his position is very endearing. And that's I hope he never loses that. I don't think he will, because if he was going to, I think he would have already with the whole Mercedes Toto hype, but he isn't. And maybe Toto should take a lot of credit for that too.
I concur, Mr. Windsor. Some say that if you're good enough, therefore you are old enough in Formula One.
Mr. Windsor, yeah, that is the case. Absolutely, that's the case.
It's a good shout. I feel like some people are saying that the biggest talking point is Ferrari, and I know you'll have something to say. That the conversation, Mr. Windsor, is around the multitudinous ineptitudes, operationally and tactically, of Ferrari. It feels like there was the mix-up over the radio. Lewis has the tyre offset on mediums. He's quicker on track, and they dilly-dally, take 2 to 3 laps, by which time the dirty air has eroded some of that tyre offset advantage. Frederic Vasseur comes out and defends Ferrari's decision-making, or lack thereof, and said that he thought the execution, the way that they handled Charles and Lewis, was perfect. What do you make of that, Mr. Windsor?
Well, I'm completely confused now. I mean, that just adds to the whole soap opera, doesn't it? Because if Fred is delighted with the way things panned out, then Ferrari got a real problem, because it was an absolute mess, total disaster. And the reality is, I was thinking this morning when I woke up, I thought, how did that happen? Can we blame Lewis? Can we blame Charles, the engineers? No, of course you can't. The guy you blame, sadly, is Fred Vasseur, because if you're going to start your two drivers on two different tires, compounds, absolutely, without any question whatsoever, you have both of them in the debriefing room with the engineers before the race, and you go through every possible scenario of what everybody's going to do in whatever situation is going to arise, because obviously there's going to be a difference between the two, an offset, as you say, and you get all that sorted before the race. It's absolutely normal racing practice. Anyone with racing blood in their veins would know that. So what was all that argy-bargy about, of Lewis having to get on the radio saying, "Oh, have you finished your cup of tea, boys? And what's going on here?" And then Charles got time to think about his rejoinder when eventually he does acquiesce and gives the position to Lewis. His rejoinder is brilliant, which is, "Oh, can you tell Lewis to go a bit quicker, please? My tires are getting too hot." I mean, absolute classic. I mean, how can Ferrari, of all teams, well, I suppose you'd say, well, Ferrari of all teams would do that. But the reason they've got Fred there is because I always imagined he was not a sort of, chaotic Ferrari manager. He was absolutely disciplined, razor sharp brain, totally decisive in everything, and would make sure he got that same level of decisiveness from all the people who work for him. And yet it's not there. And you can't really blame them. There's somebody at the top who's not cracking the whip. And it's sadly, I got to say, it's Freddie Vasseur, because this should not be happening. You shouldn't be having conversations like that. I mean, one of the worst things for me was when they got on the radio to Charles when he was behind Lewis, and they say, "Oh, Charles, if you were in free air now, how quickly do you think you could go?" And Charles said, "I don't know. Give me a chance. How am I supposed to know that?" It's like, you're the engineer. Obviously, he's going to go quicker, but how would he know if he could catch Kimi Antonelli or not? I mean, it was absolutely like Formula Ford stuff for me. I just couldn't believe it. It was actually funny. I mean, that's why in my video, I just couldn't stop laughing when I was filming it, because it was just like, let's do a spoof on the Ferrari team, and Ferrari team themselves were doing the spoof on themselves. Everything was ridiculous. I've got to say, though, I think the best comment all day, though, was from Carlos Sainz. And I just love that, with that deep voice of his on the slowdown lap, when he says something like, I think Lewis moved over under braking. Talk about the understatement of the year. Absolutely brilliant. So, yeah, I mean, the whole thing was a total mess. I suppose the only saving grace for all of this is, and this is what really Fred should have said after the race, I think. He should have said, well, yeah, it was a mess, but let's face it was only for 6th or 7th. The real issue is that the car was horrendous, and we're going to have to go back to Maranello and totally rethink where we're going and what we're doing technically. This is a complete disaster as it is at the moment. If he'd said that, it would make sense. But he didn't, and it was all for what, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th place? Imagine if I've said this about, the whole George Lewis thing. Toto was quite lucky that the car was as uncompetitive as it was, because Mercedes would have been incapable of running those two wheel to wheel if they were actually fighting for a world championship anytime between 2022 and 2024. And imagine now if the Ferrari was as good as the McLaren. Imagine the chaos at Ferrari in that situation, if they're on different tires and they're right at the front of the race, racing the two McLarens, Lewis and Charles. And I think also a part of this is changing something that was working quite well. The Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz dynamic is something, as I said, from day one, they should never have played around with. They were very fortunate to have a great race team. And we can see how good Carlos is in the Williams. Okay, Albon had a better race, but Carlos was good too, in parts. And for them now to be embarrassed by Carlos, and B, to have broken up that very, very powerful team, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, to have got to a situation where, well, Charles is our sort of lead driver now. He's really quick, but we don't really want to upset him. We want everything to go in his way. But on the other hand, we got Sir Lewis Hamilton, who's brilliant and 7 times world champion, and we can't in any way admonish him, and we have to look after them both. I mean, they've got themselves in a position now, as predicted, ridiculous decision to have that driver change, in a position now where they're sort of, they're pussyfooting around both drivers and don't know how to handle them. That's what's going on. If that had been Carlos in the car, I'm not saying that Carlos wouldn't have given up as much fight as Lewis did, but at the same time, I think the Ferrari team on the pit wall would have had more confidence in saying, no, do it now. Don't talk back, get on with it. And that's what you need. But having said that, the reality is none of that should have been happening on the radio. It all should have been sorted before the race. If Lewis is behind you, Charles, and he's on mediums and he's going more than 0.2 quicker than you, we will make the call and tell you exactly when you must move over. And if he doesn't do anything then with his mediums, you might get the position back later on. That's what's going to happen. No discussion, get on with it. And obviously they never did that, which I find absolutely astonishing. I mean, I've been around Formula One, sniffing around Formula One, if you like, for over 50 years. And I cannot think of a race team in which that conversation wouldn't have taken place before the start. Even Colin Chapman, even in the days of Ronnie and Mario, he'd still have a bit of a chat to them, and they basically kind of knew what was going to be happening within reason. Yeah, obviously Ron Dennis let it get out of control with Prost Senna, and Frank Williams never really had that control. But even then, there was a little bit more understanding because you had Patrick Head cracking the whip all the time. But Ferrari, what's going on?
Insanity, Peter. It is a joke. It was a joke yesterday, and I feel like it's almost a case in point that they're not favouring Charles Leclerc necessarily, but Scuderia Ferrari is the house that Charles built. He's got the length of service and tenure, and even by the way that they're managing Charles' stakehold before they even pitch the idea to Lewis. And that tells you a lot, I think, the high esteem, the way that they regard Charles, and that they think, by dint of his brilliant performances this season and last, that he's the guy to take them back to the mountaintop. Yes or no, Peter? Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah, I think that's right. I think over in all the opening rounds of the championship, yes, Lewis won the sprint in China, but generally speaking, Ferrari must have come to the conclusion that, yeah, Charles Leclerc is really quick. Here he is, 7 times world champion, and he's looking really good. So, yeah, I mean, it's natural there would be that sort of feel. But the problem is because Lewis brings so much stuff with him as the 7 times world champion, that Ferrari have to sort of dance around him. And it's a problem because Lewis now at this stage of his career, when he goes to the factory, it's more because he has to go to the factory and it's a branding thing with all the additional benefits that are there for the sponsors and the media, well, not the media, but the sponsors, I guess, and the whole branding thing of Ferrari. It's not because he, Lewis, wants to spend 3 days in Maranello having dinner with the mechanics every night and getting to know them all and live their lives for 3 days, as Michael used to, for example, or probably as Oscar Piastri does at McLaren. You know, that sort of very basic level of a Formula One driver being a real part of a Formula One team. And that's not, it's totally understandable that Lewis isn't in that position anymore because he's so big. You know, he's so big on the planet Earth that it's very difficult now, probably, for him just to be Lewis Hamilton, kart racer who wants to go out with the boys and eat a bit of spag bog and, you know, do a bit of karting in proper karts, not the local modern kart track, but a proper kart track, and do the things that you need to do to be really a part of the team. He's a big brand. He's the Lewis Hamilton brand, whether he likes it or not. And that's what Ferrari bought into. And that's a difficult thing to integrate. And maybe that's why Freddie Vasseur, I mean, to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe that's why he's finding it difficult, because the Lewis Hamilton he's dealing with now is not the hungry driver at ASM or ART. He's this massive global brand that's like a huge, huge oil tanker, very difficult to maneuver. And if you get it stuck sideways in the middle of the Suez Canal, it ain't going to go anywhere. And so it's not a versatile, agile, you know, tugboat, if you like. And that's the problem they've got. And I always said that was going to be the problem. You know, that's why they had this great gem in Carlos Sainz, who's, I wouldn't say he was a wingman to Charles Leclerc, because we know he can win races, but he hasn't got quite the touch and level of Charles when Charles really on it. But he's good enough to win races and good enough to keep Ferrari sharp. And that's what Ferrari are lacking now.
This is chaos. I can't remember seeing something so chaos. This is reminiscent of 2010 Red Bull, Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel. Is it like the level of chaos it feels unprecedented. Peter, let me ask you the final question on Ferrari this way. Should, with all what we've just said about Charles potentially being the quicker of the driver, the most likely of the two Ferrari drivers to win a championship of the drivers' variety, with that front and centre of the mind, Peter, should Ferrari have instantly commanded Charles' seed position to Lewis Hamilton on the quicker yellow labelled medium compound tyre?
No, not at all. No, that Charles is the senior driver in the sense that, as you say, if Ferrari ever do produce a world championship winning car, which is a huge if, of course, then Charles is, as I've been saying, the driver more likely to win the championship because of his history with the team, because of how quick he is and how good he is, and because Lewis is in a more difficult situation. Let's just sum it up that way. That's one thing. But then you've got, on a race-to-race basis, you've got the bare facts of choice of tyre compound, where they qualify on the grid, incidents that may or may not happen, all the variables that come into play on a race-to-race basis. And in this race, it was very clear that Lewis was quicker than Charles on the medium tyres. And within half a lap, they should have been saying to Charles, Lewis is quicker, move over. Of course they should. And that was, Lewis was quite right to get irritated by the whole thing because it was just destroying his tyres. And when the tyres are softer than if it's on the medium rather than the hard, they're going to go off even more. The effect is going to be multiplied if you're behind another car. If it had been, obviously, a softer tyre is going to go off quicker in that situation. And that's why when he eventually did get in front, I felt quite sorry for Lewis because then it was inevitable that he wasn't going to go as quickly as Ferrari thought he would go, which was for anybody on the pit wall, they kept showing, the top brass of Ferrari. I'm sure they have no idea about detail like that. And they just expected Lewis, once he got in front of Charles, okay, Lewis, you're in front of our great Charles now. Go and prove what you can do. And he didn't really go any quicker than Charles. And that's just naivety, isn't it? On the part of the top brass on the pit wall. So I felt sorry for Lewis at that point because not much he could do. His tyres had gone off. And George Russell, by contrast, in an open, free track, with Max behind him on the medium tyre as well, no dirty air at all. Medium tyres were fine right up to the end of the race, very quick. No way Max could even get within DRS range of him. And yet Charles was able to sit behind Lewis. So that's the whole thing. They cooked Lewis's tyres. They didn't give him a fair run in front of Charles. And then, I thought the other great comment was once eventually Lewis then was told to give the position back to Charles, they immediately get on the radio and pour acid into the wound. Yeah, a really strong acid into the wound, which is bleeding. And they say, oh, Carlos Sainz is only 4.2 seconds behind you, Lewis. To which Lewis says, oh, do you want me to let him pass too? Which is a very good response, I think. Excellent. Excellent. Well done, Lewis Hamilton. He hasn't lost his dry sense of humour either.
I don't hate it. Go on, Mr. Windsor. Let me ask you about what's going on at McLaren. Because there's a lot of chat about Lando. Is it Lando? Is he the favourite for the championship? Or is it Oscar now? I think Lando proved himself every bit quick enough to win a driver's championship over the course of the weekend. But this other stuff, whether you call it, I don't know, soft intangibles, lack of mental fortitude, the inability to execute in the way that Oscar Piastri can, him not being robust enough emotionally. Do McLaren now, on the back of the most recent evidence, need to build their castle, need to mount a drivers' championship campaign at the altar of Oscar Piastri?
No, I don't think they do. I've been going on about how I'm looking forward to seeing Zach's master plan and how he's going to manage these two guys. But I see what his master plan is now. It's do nothing and just let it all happen. And it's working for him because now Oscar's been so successful and he scored so many points early on that at the next race, Imola, if Lando's leading and Oscar's right on his tail, maybe on mediums and Lando's on hards, say, I don't think they'll do anything. I think they'll just let it happen because Oscar now already will be thinking, nah, it's okay. Lando can win this one. I'll be second. And so it's kind of going to happen for them. So I've got to take my hat off and say, wow, I never thought it would work out this way. But it is, Lando's Oscar is such a good bloke and he's surrounded by such good people that, whether it be Mark Webber, whether it be his engineering team, whatever, he's got very good people around him. He's very confident that it would probably be even more helpful for him within McLaren and winning the championship if he did let Lando win a race or two. I say let him win, put a bit of pressure on him, but don't do anything silly. Just sit behind him and let it happen. And I think that's what Oscar will do. If that is a situation coming up over the next 3 races, we've got a triple header coming up, haven't we? In one of those races, I think he'll say, no, okay, no problem. Lando did a better job than me or something. He'll say something really nice and it'll keep the peace. And that's the best thing he can do right now within the McLaren team is keep the peace. He doesn't want any aggro. And that's the best way Oscar can now win a championship. Wow. As for Lando, you're right. He was, as predicted, he was very good at Miami, very quick at Miami. I indeed even predicted he would win the race. Got that one wrong. Well, I mean, let's just say, he won the sprint race And everybody's saying, oh, well, quite lucky there. But it's a bit like Johnny Herbert winning the European Grand Prix for Stewart all those years. I saw the direction of the flags. I knew what was going to happen with the weather. I was watching the flags while I was going around 9 different corners. Yeah, good on you, Johnny. Bit like Lando could say the same thing. Oh, well, obviously I knew when to stop. I had the whole race planned out, mega. So that was good. And then he out-qualified Oscar. So that was good. But then, and this is where Lando, obviously took far too long to get past Max. And by then, Oscar was long gone, 9 seconds in front. But just going right back to the start, Lando made a good start. So that's the first thing. Lando does make good starts in Formula One now. They're, end of story on that one. And he's on the inside. And Max, maybe he induces Max into it, but more likely because the Red Bull's not as easy a car to get right up to maximum or as good as you can get the tire temperatures going into turn one. The McLaren team seem to be doing a better job than Red Bull, and Max locks up, runs wide. So there's your thing for Lando. He's got his open door down the inside on the right-hander. The problem at Miami is the left-hander immediately afterwards, and it's a quick left-hander. They're just accelerating at this point. And it's a little bit like the Max Lewis thing at Silverstone in 21, when I've always said, yes, you could kind of blame Lewis more than Max for that, because it's not an overtaking place and the inside of Copse is a difficult place to be. But at the same time, Max should have read that that's what Lewis was going to do. It's not, that was pretty obvious that Lewis was going to do that. And I think it was the same thing with Lando. I think he should have, at that millisecond, I think Oscar and a few others would have thought, nah, Max is for sure just going to use all the road here. And there's no way you're going to get a penalty there if you do that, because you're talking about a quick bit of road, a left-hand kink, where you've got to use a little bit. He didn't actually use all the road, but he used a bit more than he perhaps needed to. And Lando should have realised that's what Max was going to do, and backed off and just fallen in behind Max, and he would have got him 3 laps later and he would have won the Grand Prix for sure. He would have beaten Oscar. And I think because of all the pressure that's been building up about, Oscar's the great race driver, Oscar's got the presence of mind, Lando's panicking, Lando's this, Lando's that. I think Lando's reaction to that situation was just to stay flat on the throttle and just hope that Max was going to back away and give him the road. That was never going to happen in a million years. And it's easy for us to say that from these seats in which we're sitting now, but I've got to say, that's what I felt at the time. I just thought, back up, no, it's too late. There's no way Max was going to give that corner to Lando, the second corner, and that's where Lando lost it, sadly. And I think after that he was a bit frazzled, especially when he came up behind Max again and had to do another pass on Max. Yeah, of course he was always going to be able to get him in the end with DRS, but he had to work so hard for it, didn't he? And that showed up against how relatively easily Oscar was able to get past Max. Well, he was easily able to push Max into a slight mistake, which we don't see very often. Max obviously not happy with the brakes and the grip and the tires were going off, but he didn't lock up an inside front and run wide at turn 1 when Lando was pushing him. He only did it when Oscar was pushing him. And I think that's quite telling. In Max's mind, Oscar's a serious racing driver. And, Max made his second mistake, which was obviously the one repeated from lap 1. And so there we are. Lando's got this image now, certainly in the brain of Max, probably in the brain of George and probably Charles too, that he's pretty easy to rattle and to get the better of. And that's what it's all building up. It's momentum building up, and it's a shame. Lando did a very good job to out qualify Oscar for the Grand Prix, and yet it actually came back and hit him in the face, because by the time they came out of turn 2, the race was lost already from his point of view.
Yeah, I think you're being very you're handling Lando with kid gloves here, Peter. I think as brilliantly quick as he is, he lacks the ability to read the racing room. He doesn't take a step back from the F1 world to see the F1 trees. You hear Oscar in the post-race press conference, and he says words to this effect, that we had a conversation before the race, and Andrea and Zach told us that we'd have anywhere between 8 tenths and a second per lap advantage on the rest. So why am I trying to? Why rush this? I don't need to pull a manoeuvre off a turn 2, turn 3 on lap 1. I've got 57 laps to make my move, and I'm going to do it in a way where I'm not going to take any risk because I don't need to, because I hold all the aces per se. And for some reason, I think exactly what you said, Peter, like it's as if Lando has this small man complex, that he's desperately, he's keen to prove to the world and the F1 press and media that he's the big dog, that I can race with Max. Look at how good my overtaking is, and that doesn't win world championships, does it? On the contrary, Peter, that can lose you. That sort of attitude, caring too much about what people are thinking, has and can lose you driver championships now.
Which is why I've been saying since last winter, Lando needs to stop all his social media and minimize the number of interviews he does, because, and the latter point is a very big one, because a lot of the questions are going to be along the lines of, do you think you can take the championship to Oscar? How do you think you're driving at the moment compared with Oscar? Things like that. So by definition, virtually every comment that Lando is induced to making is a sort of negative comment trying to prove that he can do it. And that's not a healthy thing to have to be doing. And I think you're absolutely right, Cameron. I think, you just kind of filled out what I was saying. In that millisecond, when he had the option just to come slightly off the throttle and give that bit of road to Max and filter in behind him, he didn't do that because of all this stuff, because there's something in his psyche that's saying, no, I'm going to show that I'm not weak and I'm not going to back off alongside Max Verstappen. There's that sort of stuff. And it's not keeping a clear head, as you say. So, that is exactly why I keep saying, Lando, stay in your lane, stop all the interviews and the social media, focus exactly on your race, your car, your team, and do it your way. And he's not doing that. And that showed up in the race.
I think he's got a problem, Peter. I think this is not quite terminal, but nearly. I don't think Lando understands that he has a Alcoholics Anonymous, right? The first step to solving for a problem is admitting that you have one in the first place. And I don't think Lando, he's very simplistic as a racer, and he's not doing the 4D level chess, Queen sacrifice, decline type of moves that Oscar's able to do. And that's why Max already respects Oscar and understands the gargantuan rival that he can be, if not now, definitely in future, as versus Lando, who's just like, he's a racehorse with blinkers, Peter. And I don't know, brilliantly quick, but almost crude in the way that he races. And I think if he wants to win championships, he'll have to fix for that very quickly. Mr. Windsor, let me ask.
Well, just to take you up on that point, you said, you mentioned the AA thing, to acknowledge your problem. I mean, the difficulty, of course, in that comparison is that actually he doesn't have a problem. He doesn't have a problem. He's in the best race car on the planet. He's in the best race team, arguably, because he knows that team very well now. And Zach has always treated him almost like a son. And he's got no issues in the world. He's got a wonderful life. He's got no problems at all. All he needs to be is a racing driver. And so what are the problems? The problems are all things that are happening around him, all the noise, if you like, that's there. And he'll say, well, that's not my problem. Well, it's not your problem, Lando. But the point is, don't listen to it. Cut it off. Put on the headset. Get away from it. That is the issue. And I think it's a difficult one in his situation to understand. I'm not trying to defend him. I'm just trying to understand and explain the way he's probably thinking, which is he will come away from Miami now, and in a way it'll be more damaging, because he'll be thinking, well, I won the sprint race, out-qualified. I'm obviously quicker than Oscar, out-qualified him, just unlucky. Max had me off. I would have won the race if Max hadn't had me off. I don't know why I didn't get a penalty. That's what he'll be thinking. And so he'll be going to Imola thinking, right, I'll blow them all away and show his boss, sort of thing, which is completely the wrong attitude. Of course, you've got to be very self-critical. And the reality, actually, of Miami is that neither Oscar nor Lando got the best from that McLaren MCL 39. because they were beaten in qualifying by a guy in a much lesser car. And both of them should be thinking, whoa, where can I improve now? That's really what Lando should be thinking. What is that Max is doing in that car that enables him to get that lap time out of it? Oh, wow, look at the way he's going into turn 7. I'm going to see if I can study some telemetry, see what he's doing there. And, oh, I can't see anything. Maybe I ought to try that at Imola going into Tosa or whatever he's going to think. That's what they should be doing, because neither of them actually are driving as well as either Kimi Antonelli or Max Verstappen at this stage, in my opinion.
What an absolutely brilliant point, Peter, that you make there. And one of the McLaren drivers in the post-race press conference echoed your sentiments. One of them was like, okay, so listen, we weren't perfect in qualifying. I dropped a couple tenths. There's no way that Max Verstappen should have put it on pole when we've got a car in race trim that's a second, 8 tenths to a second quicker. And that driver was Oscar Piastri, Peter. Meanwhile, Lando's over there saying, oh, it's crash or don't pass, and Max Verstappen didn't drive. He wasn't very smart in the way he was driving. Like, you don't get it, Lando. You're focused on these things that don't matter. If again we're having the conversation under the umbrella heading of winning a championship, I think more than anything, Peter, what shows me the difference between Oscar and Lando is the overtakes. So you look at Lewis last race, Lando messes up the DRS. It takes him 3 laps to realise the line of least resistance. Oscar, bang, and it's done. Doesn't even think, like he's just, you know what I mean? He's just, it seems like expediting for his learning curve. He's almost a step ahead of Lando, notwithstanding the fact that this is his 3rd season opposed to Lando's 7th. And similarly with Max, Oscar just gets the assignment, understands that this is going to be a difficult task. But let me not forget that I've got a second in hand on Max and there's a line of least resistance. So let me traverse this path this way, as opposed to Lando, who costs himself 5 places at the start of the race and has to do this gargantuan comeback. I don't know, Peter. I think it's the difference between the two is growing more and more obvious by the race.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, Lando was unbelievably aggressive once that incident had happened, and he was, the way he passed the Williams and the Mercs. I mean, he passed, I can't remember who it was now, maybe Albon, turn 11. I've never seen anybody pass there. And I think that, again, is indicative of Lando's scrambled mind, because there's no reason to take that sort of risk passing a Williams if you're in a McLaren. Just do it in a very safe, DRS, easy target sort of way. Why would he be doing that? I guess it was because he was thinking, oh, it's a great car and Max has had me off and the adrenaline was pumping and the pulse rate was up, and he was just passing everybody as quickly as he could because he was so worried about Oscar getting away from him. And that again just shows that he wasn't really thinking clearly. And that's, as I say, from Zach's point of view, it's kind of all falling into place because he doesn't have to make any decisions now. I think Oscar's going to help Zach make decisions, but as I say, he's going to start give and taking now, and he's going to giving and taking. He's going to give Lando a little bit of rope sometimes, without doing the Senna on Prost thing, and that's going to keep a balance. But Oscar's always going to be super cool, and by which I mean very, very calm, and he's always going to be going really well. I mean, what Lando really should be focusing on right now, in my opinion, is what is he going to do if Oscar starts really working again on his short corners for the slow circuits coming up, and he starts realizing, I've got such a good race car now. Max has done something in that Red Bull that I didn't do on that lap in Miami. I need to make sure that I get the best from the car on slow corners now. I've really, really got to start going back to short corners. If he does that, Lando won't see him for dust, sadly. And that's what Lando needs to be thinking. He's got to be doing the same thing. Lando's still got sorry to interrupt, but Lando's still got a couple of areas where I think he's actually better than Oscar right now. I think his touch is softer. And you can argue, why did Oscar not beat Lando in qualifying? And I think it was because Oscar was doing one of these on the limit, so far as he's concerned, not the car's limit in terms of lap time, but on the limit laps of braking as late as he can without locking up and getting on the power as soon as he can, and using his great car control and feel and all the rest of it, and the way he's using the pedals to do the lap. But in doing that on 2 or 3 corners, he's getting on the power fraction too early, and the back end's just getting away a little bit, and he's just losing a little bit of time. It's a little bit scruffy. You're not seeing Lando doing that sort of thing. His mistakes are more fundamental of, oh, I just ran completely wide there. I just braked too late. Lando's got a soft touch when he's really got it under control, a softer touch, I think, than Oscar. But Oscar has more potential because he hasn't been focusing on extending the straights into and out of the corners as much as he used to at the beginning of his McLaren career. So that's where they're at the moment. So Lando still has great opportunities to improve. He's in a great team. He's got a great racing car, and he's still got this wonderful feel for letting the car float and settle, going in a fraction too quickly, getting the weight transfer done, and then just getting the car into the corner beautifully on quick corners. He's really good under pressure doing that. But he's not so good when it's all about late braking and getting on the power early. That's when he's in trouble. And unfortunately, there aren't many corners like Pouin on the Grand Prix circuit on the trail on which we go. What Lando can do works really well at Pouin or going into Cops. Not really Cops, no, it's too quick, isn't it?
Specky.
I would say Stowe would be a better one, probably. Very good through Stowe.
And you know,
And probably the corner after the pits on full tanks. He's probably very good there at Silverstone.
so it's a good shout, Mr. Windsor. And I think what's most worrying for Lando is that there's a driver at McLaren who will be listening to Peter Windsor talking about short corners and V lines, the ability. I'm telling you, Peter, there'll be a driver who will be listening to Mr. Windsor and his infinite wisdom around manipulating the car on and around the limits of adhesion on these short corners. And that driver's name will be Oscar Piastri. He's going to get better, Peter, because he's humble and he's a sponge as far as hoovering up all of the knowledge of the people who came before him. That's the problem, Peter. But I digress. Let's talk about Max Verstappen, because a lot of people have talked. I want to talk to you about the qualifying lap in particular. It's almost a shame, Peter, that we have these conversations on a Monday and the genius of the pole laps almost faded to black. Talk to me about Max Verstappen's pole lap and how good was it in the context of him having beaten yet again Oscar and Lando in a car which is ostensibly a second quicker in race trim.
Oh, it was outstanding. It was outstanding in its execution, but it was also outstanding in its context, because there was no way Max was going to get the pole through sectors 2 and 3, but he might be able to do something through sector 1, specifically the change of direction. I think it's turn 3, turn 4, high speed change of direction, and then going into 7. And if you get 7 right, you've then got the benefit of the straight, and you've got that acceleration run out of 7. And that's I don't think he focused on that. It was just that's where he was really good. And I think it's quite easy to look at it and say, oh, well, he used the tires up in sector 1, but wasn't so good in sector 2 and 3, lit the tires up or whatever. I don't think that was the case. I think that was the only place where he could potentially beat the McLaren drivers, because it is all about finesse there, and it's all about things that Max does really well. Now, that's not how Max would have been thinking, because he's not that sort of guy. He doesn't think, oh, I've got this advantage over Oscar or Lando. He just thinks that's a bit of road where I know I can get it absolutely right, and probably even in a Red Bull, I'm not going to be losing much time there if I get it absolutely right. And so on that pole lap, and indeed the first run he did too, just as good, really. When you see there's a very fast section of road, I guess it's 3-4, where they come out and you see the way they load up the car and before the change of direction. And George Russell's a good example, absolutely fearless. He's right on the edge of the weight transfer that way, and then it's bang the other way. Whereas, and so he's actually using probably, I don't know, about that much road more than either side than Max Verstappen, who goes in and it's just like like that. And when you don't ask as much from the car and you've got the loads under more control because of the finesse you're using, you've then got a more stable car going into that long run into 7. And going into 7, it was all about shortening the corner in and out, particularly for exit, getting the rotation point exactly right. but of course extending the straight as much as you could into 7 and making sure that you were maximizing the car in every dimension in terms of dynamic forces. And that's what he was doing. He had exactly the right amount of initial steering, exactly the right amount of initial throttle takeout, deceleration, and exactly the right amount of initial braking, and then was modulating the brake pedal against the steering input to get the rotation point exactly millimeter perfect. And then as soon as he had that rotation point, bang, he was gone. Just dead straight car. All the load was out of it. It was management of weight transfer of the like that you'll never see unless it's a Max at that sort of peak. Lewis certainly at his peak, Charles at his peak, Michael at his peak, Ayrton Senna at his peak. Not short corners though, but management of weight transfer. Jim Clark, Sterling Moss. That's the level that we saw in qualifying. On television, with all the stuff they show, impossible to see the differences. All you're seeing is the steering input, which of course is beautiful, compared with, say, Lewis at various stages of the race, who actually seemed to be shadow boxing. The first time I've ever seen Lewis doing some shadow boxing was on those hard tyres early on. It was like, ooh, he was making steering inputs that he didn't need to make, if you see what I mean. Because, the car, I just didn't know where the car was going to go. Anyway, going back to Max, everything was just perfect. And he made, of course, a lot of people say, it was an easy lap for him, lots of grip. It wasn't easy at all. And it was difficult after that for the McLaren drivers to beat him, because Max was never going to be super slow through sector 2 and 3. He was always going to be about where they were, but that's not where he was ever going to have an advantage. So all he then had to do, basically, not that he would have seen it that way, was basically be very, very clean and neat through sector 2, through the slow stuff, making sure he just squeezed on the power the right way, didn't brake too late anywhere, stayed absolutely where the grip was at its maximum. And then in high-speed braking at the end of sector 3, at the end of the straight, we know how good he is there. It's a similar thing, but not quite the same as 7, because 7, the car's got lateral load, and at the end of the straight, it was basically, it's straight line. Now, of course, he was shortening the corner, but it didn't require quite as much finesse as 7, let's put it that way. So that was the lap. And that's what Oscar probably does think about, and he's thinking about on the flight back to Europe, because that isn't the way Oscar was going through that section of road. Oscar was mega quick through the change of direction, unbelievable confidence in car control. And then he was, wait till I got all the weight transfer through, and then it's brake, then it's in. It wasn't like Max wasn't waiting for the weight transfer. He was creating and managing the weight transfer before he was telling the car what he wanted to do, instructing the car into what he wanted it to do. Yeah. Whereas Oscar was almost on the edge of reacting to what the car was giving him. And there's a slight difference there. Very, very small. Same with Lando. I think Lando and Oscar are very similar in that bit of road just there. And that is the difference. That's the difference between Max and those two McLaren drivers. And I suppose, we can only daydream, but if Max was in that McLaren, I'm sorry, gosh, Lando, you wouldn't know how far he'd gone away from you. He'd be just gone. And that is the truth. Right now, I'm not saying that neither Lando nor Oscar don't have the potential to start to get to that next level. They do. But whether they will is another matter. Because Oscar's focus is just going to be on beating Lando, obviously, to win the championship. And Lando's focus is beating Oscar. So they don't actually have, how am I going to beat Max Verstappen as a goal at the moment?
No. Talk to then the 20 laps that Max Verstappen, the first 20 laps of the race, that Max managed to keep the McLarens behind him. Peter, does that level of racecraft and Devil get enough credit in the modern world that is F1 in 2025? What were we looking at?
Well, we should add Kimi Antonelli to that, of course, because Kimi was all over him, wasn't he, on that first lap? And Max just has that amazing ability of appearing not to be looking in his mirrors. He probably isn't either. And just not making mistakes where other drivers do make mistakes under high-speed braking, running wide, things like that. He just doesn't do it. And he's got the perfect timing. He's just got that feel for when my feelings about DRS. I can't stand DRS. But, he knows exactly when Piastri is going to do that. And a millisecond before Piastri does that, Max does that, and Oscar's thinking, "Oh yeah, this guy's not bad." I was kind of living those laps when Oscar was behind him, thinking of the way Oscar was thinking, which was, "This guy's good. This guy's good." And I know that's probably how he would have been thinking in his brain as well. Very calm, very relaxed. This guy's good. I'm going to get him. Don't worry. Wow, he is good. And you know, it was just a pleasure to watch that, and it reinforces what I've always felt, which is that defense is just as impressive as attack in Formula One, in motor racing in general. And this emphasis that we have constantly in Formula One about the number of overtakes per race and which circuit produces the most overtakes and overtakes of what everybody wants. Well, I disagree. I think we want cat and mouse, and I think we want defense as much as we want attack. And wouldn't it be brilliant if whenever the guy behind had DRS, the guy in front also had DRS? And I mean, I'm being facetious now. Let's phrase it another way. If there'd been no DRS, if DRS had never been invented, the racing would have been much better, in my opinion, in Miami, because Max Verstappen would have got more reward for the way he was driving that car. McLaren would still have been 1-2 because they had a much better race car. They didn't need DRS to do all those passes, as indeed Lando Norris showed when he was passing people on the outside of turn 8 or whatever it was. And and DRS is very unrewarding of great driving. And that's what I just don't like about it. I think it's terrible. And I repeat my point. I don't think the race would have been any less dramatic if there'd been no DRS at all. We would have felt much more about the quality of Max's driving in defence as well.
You've got to pander to the masses, though, Peter. Do you know what I mean? Of course, it's not exciting if you don't get a gazillion overtakes. It's not a
Well,
you're disenfranchising the drive to survivors, aren't you? And it's a very fine tightrope walk to keep engaged yourself and myself, Peter, who will be watching anyway, and make sure that the drive to survivors don't walk out the door and carry their currency with them. You know.
yeah, but put another way, if we'd had no DRS, there's no way Oscar Piastri would have got Max in 2 or 3 laps. He would have been behind him for 15, 20 laps, probably. Much more dramatic.
Very well said.
He would have got him, as I say, he would still have won the race, but it would have been a much longer, more difficult, creative pass that we saw. And what's wrong with that? How can that be bad for the sport? I don't get it.
Yeah.
I still don't get it.
No.
I don't like DRS. Never have. It's artificial and it's wrong.
Don't disagree, Mr. Windsor. Mate, you've been a legend as always. Too generous with your time, Mr. Windsor. And if you like the God tier financial, what are you on about, Cameron? If you like the God tier Formula One insights from Mr. Peter D. Windsor, then go and subscribe to his channel. If you're not subscribed already, let me say this from the bottom of my heart. What are you doing with your life? Purple sectors each and every single time. Peter D. Windsor on YouTube. And shortly thereafter, get yourself over to your favourite podcasting platform. 5 stars and a follow. The Short Corners podcast. If you are watching this on the interwebs that they call YouTube, do me a favour, like, comment and share with a mate who also watches Formula One. If you're listening on your favourite podcasting platform, do the same for me. 5 stars and a cheeky follow. Mr. Windsor, you're an absolute legend, sir. Thank you as always for the time. I'm grateful in extremis ad infinitum. Between now and next time, chat, do yourselves a favour and remember to look but never stare.